Welcome all to the ESG series webinar on demystifying ESG and decoding sustainability reporting. Rosefield Energy Tech was founded with the key objective of bringing all stakeholders from the energy and electric vehicle sector together to participate in a responsible decision making and assist enterprises in improving their sustainability performance. Rosefield has a strong network across the globe. We are an independent consulting firm and maintain strict firewalls between different stakeholders. Adopting sustainability is the only way to build businesses and shape a green future for the next generation. With this philosophy, we have been creating awareness for a more greener and sustainable future through various offerings like webinars, trainings, workshops, newsletters, and blogs. Due to rising global temperature, it has become of utmost importance to take action on climate change. The COVID pandemic has also made us more aware of the social impact of our actions. ESG framework is assessment of companies' behaviors concerning environmental performance, social impact, and governance issues. ESG, environment, social, and governance. We all have been hearing about this buzzword in recent times. But what is ESG? How does it impact us? What do organizations need to do to comply with the ESG framework? To understand this and much more about ESG, we have brought to you a series of webinars on ESG. For today's webinar, we have an ESG expert, Mr. Shankar Rajgopal. He has 37 years of worldwide experience in operations, quality, business excellence, safety, and sustainability at manufacturing, construction, and technology sectors. He has been a successful change agent with diverse exposure in various companies like Gerda Chemicals, Asian Paints, Castrol, British Petroleum, and much more. He is a BE Chemical Engineering from BITS Pilani and PG Diploma in Business Management, University of Indianapolis, USA. He's a certified business excellence assessor, six thinking hat champion, and a lateral thinker. He's also a GRI certified ESG professional and has won many awards like Sustainability Professional of the Year, Singapore ESG Hackathon winner. He's also an organizational behavior transformation and change management expert, a thorough leader and speaker on operational and business excellence, sustainability safety leader at national and global platforms. We welcome you, Mr. Shankar.
Thank you so much.
To have a conversation with Shankar, we have Akshay Arvind, partner, DA Consulting. Akshay is a chartered accountant, a CS, and working with various companies on ESG. I now invite Akshay to have a conversation with Mr. Shankar on ESG.
Thank you, Kasturi, and welcome, Mr. Shankar. Hope you're doing fine.
Absolutely. Pleasure, Akshay.
So as you're aware, the world is changing. Global challenges such as climate change, increased regulatory pressures, social and demographic shifts, privacy and data security concerns represent new and increasing risks for investors and business. Therefore, it is essential for investors and businesses to know the changes which is happening them and what are the changes which impact them. And one such thing is the global framework regarding ESG, climate change, as well as the Indian perspective of both companies adopting sustainability practices and the government enforcing reporting on such matters. Without further ado, I would like to ask you the first question to today's webinar is, what is ESG? Because everyone thinks ESG is all to do with environment. Is that all?
Interesting you begin with that, Arvind. I think we all see ESG like the blind men look at the elephant, right? These are terms which are used interchangeably also. But let's begin by using and understanding demystifying ESG in a simple manner. No better way to do this, Akshay, than explain this through the triple bottom line concept. I'll explain this way. This is the time of the year when all companies are publishing their annual reports, largely financial. The CFO looks at publishing the revenue growth, looking at the profit margins, return on investments, capital costs, how well the company's done, how the risk management has fared, how's the valuation of the enterprise, and appeal to the investors for listed companies. More than profits, this looks at prosperity, which is the bigger word, and is measured no doubt by the economic performance. And then there is the social bottom line, which looks at the community. That's the reason why industries are in business. They need to sustain, they need to manage the community well. They need to look at the social impact, the health and safety of not only the workers, but also the extended value chain, to be of employer of choice, an equal opportunity employer, to give fair compensation, to take care of the reward and recognition. So this looks at the social equity in the way that equity, and we spoke of the pandemic, we can see how the COVID vaccine has also not been spread across some of the developing countries. So this is measured by the social performance. The connect between the financial and the social is called the equitable. But let's come to the environmental bottom line. This is called the environmental stewardship, but looks at energy and water, material intensity, the emissions that you generate by the operations that you do. And it could be just not just a manufacturer, it could be any kind of entity, including a logistics, an IT company. It looks at operational excellence, design efficiencies, how they get in new product service opportunities, the full cycle impact of the processes, and also process improvements. Largely, this is measured in the environmental performance. The connector between the environmental and the social is called the bearable. The one between the environmental and the financial is called the viable. So what is the important thing here is we've got to look at the connect, the hotspot between all three, and that is what is called the ESG performance, what's called the ESG triple bottom line. As Kasturi said, environment, social, and governance, these form the triple bottom line. These are the three factors that help determine the quality of governance and risk management for all the practices that's present in an organization. And that's what an external investor or external stakeholder, it could be a new joining who looks at a company at a campus come in for placement. He looks at a company from the overall perspective. It's not just the financials, he looks at it from the social and the operational part of it. So this is why the ESG is not just a big buzzword, it is the way that people would make decisions, and they call it the triple bottom line. The financial is called the profits. It's not a dirty word. Profitability is the ultimate reason why businesses are in business. If they don't make profit, they won't sustain. But they can't do a business impacting the community or harming people. And therefore, there's a social element of it. So in a sense, the way this goes, Akshay, if you were to make a decision, you wear the hat of a CFO and look at the profits. You also need to wear the hat of a CHRO and look at the people dimension. And the operations head, the COO, you would also need to look at that and think of how you would make an operation efficient, operation efficiency. So ultimately, every employee is going to be looking at a CEO as a line manager. So this is typically what they call ESG. The triple bottom line is what they term as the profits, people, and planet. So the people is the ultimate, the soft spot. The planet is variable. The profits are ephemeral. For business to sustain, they need to look at getting all these three work together. So like I said, this is like a triple filter test where any decision that you take, it could be anything that you do, set up a plant, you set up a new line, make a new purchase, or hire a new logistics supplier, or hire a new vendor. You got to look at sustainability in every part of it. So like I said, again, every decision has to pass through the three C's to be equitable, bearable, and viable, to hit the sweet spot to be sustainable. So the economic of the profit is the ultimate bottom line. The social is the next layer. The environment of the profit is the next. And like you said, how does it connect with organizations? In the opening introduction, Akshay, you also mentioned, how does it connect with the organization, right? Yes. ESG, and we said we'll not speak about greenwashing now, but just to kind of take the elephant in the room, it's also got to connect with the organizational purpose. Why would you do ESG? I spoke about some of the reasons why companies do ESG, but it's ultimately got to connect with the purpose. So if there is, that's what they call the quadruple bottom line, where apart from the profits, the people and the planet, it's got to be in some way syncing with the organizational purpose. If that is not, there's a dimension that is missed. And this is why it's important to, from the governance, bring in a sharper dimension to the way companies do business.
Lovely. Thanks, Mr. Shankar. But I have one interesting take on this. We have been talking about climate change for the last 3, 4, 5 decades now. We have talked about saving the Amazon rainforest in the 90s. And then we spoke about how internet is going to create a lot of job opportunities and also help in reducing climate change, various technologies in this space. But why has ESG gained its importance today, especially in the last 5 or 6 years with introduction of CSR and then now in the concept of ESG today?
So I guess I'll come back to this in a simple manner. You are based in Chennai, Arvind, Ashwin?
Mumbai, actually.
Mumbai, actually. So I began my journey in, I think if you remember, July 2004, where the first floods hit Mumbai, where I was in a place where we said, let's get the kids to school close to home. We were in Podar school on Podar Road, but that rainy day, we couldn't get back to, couldn't get the kids back. We were all stuck in office. Likewise, I've been in floods in Chennai, and there's been the last couple of months, I've seen some of the hottest summers. So the reason why the last 5 years, even say 5 months, ESG has been growing in importance is because, and you know what the tipping point is, it's a point of no return, where you push things beyond a particular point. After that, it takes on its own momentum. You can't stop, change, or alter the rhythm of that movement of the ball. So we've kind of reached the tipping point in this point in time where, the temperature of what you're seeing in Mumbai, with Chennai, and some of the island cities are also going underwater. Some of the large ice sheets in Antarctica, some of holiday destinations. There's some 1,200 more lakes that's being added on in Switzerland every year. All this has an impact of global warming. So what this means is, and I think there's a difference between some of what's called the natural factors. There is something that's happened because of the natural heating, and the Earth is actually cooled over time. But there are some things like the geological changes, the solar variability, and the volcanic dust levels. But largely, these changes that have been happening of late, and there are people who are disbelievers like Trump who said, no, it's not because of humans. It's not anthropogenic, as they say.
Yeah.
But largely it's been proven that it's the greenhouse gases, the aerosols, the depletion of the ozone layer, the land use change, the cultivation, livestock that's come in. All these are the human factors. So these are the typical, the devils in the room. These are the greenhouse gases, as you call it. So GHGs are carbon dioxide. And where did this start? This started with the Industrial Revolution. Methane largely comes from livestock, animals. I was in Australia for some time, where although there's not that much of industrial revolution there, there's still a lot of animals and livestock which causes methane. And there is nitrous oxide, and there is the transformers and electricals that cause the hydrofluorocarbons, the perfluorocarbons. So all of these are the greenhouse gases. So typical, in a simple way, what's actually happening, and this is for the listeners who'd like to demystify climate change. Everyone's heard of this big buzzword called GHG, ozone layer, and climate change, and we feel that the COVID and the pandemic has kind of caused the biodiversity to kind of get back in and the world to cool down. So this is actually the effect of the solar infrared radiation that comes in, hits the Earth's surface, and gets reflected back. And these, some of these get, absorbed, and some of it get reflected back here. So overall, the Earth's temperature is at an equilibrium here. This might explain to the viewers what this means here. So the solar radiation largely gets reflected back, and when it is re-radiated back, it normally escapes into space. When you have this greenhouse gas layers, we talked about carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, all these cause a layer. Welcome. You come at the right time, folks. This is right time for climate change, all of you. So there is heat that is emitted back. So when there is a bigger ozone layer that comes in, there is less heat that escapes into space, which means there is more heat that gets reflected back. So the Earth is getting warmer. And that's why the temperature from the 30s to the 40s to the 50s to the 60s kind of constantly rising there. The bad news is, and as per the projection here, this comes in from a scenario that is mapped by the a representative conservation pathway. Whatever we do, the temperature is going to rise, which is why I mentioned that this is going to be a tipping point kind of scenario, where whatever we do, we measure all of these as part of carbon dioxide equivalent, although it could be methane or nitrous oxide. It's all measured in the basis of carbon dioxide. So you can see the parts per million on the y-axis is constantly going up. Regardless of the kind of mitigation that we do, the CO2 levels are going to rise. So in a sense, what's going to happen, Akshay, as I said, how is climate change going to change the future? So, there are lots of things that we are trying to do. We go for EVs, as you can see in the slide. There is solar, wind, alternate forms of energy. There's people who can cycle to work, pool and stuff. And then there is the, the fossil fuels that kind of keep getting burnt and pollution that keep getting generated. So like we said, in the business as usual scenario also, the climate change is going to hit the temperature is going to go up, rise maybe less than 4 degrees. But even if you do aggressive mitigation, we kind of going to land up at a temperature that's 1.5, which is why the science of climate change has given us to this stage where, it all began with the Industrial Revolution. And the other point I think the audience should know is, there is always a challenge between the targets towards carbon abatement taken by the developed nations and the imposed targets on the developing nations. So the entire pollution of the Industrial Revolution began mid 1700s, and it all began in Europe, right? Not much in even in US or even in India. It hardly began in these countries in the Middle East. So the greenhouse gas emissions that's clotting the ozone layer, causing that gap there, these are what started and what was in 250 years ago, 300 years ago. These are the pollution that's caused by them. So they say that it's the price, the cost of the pollution, the polluter pays. So this climate change we're suffering is because of what's the sins of the past, because what our forefathers have done, and that too in the developed countries. So although there's something we can do, and this is where the slide is nicely explaining the entire science of climate change, where there is, of course, some things that, like I said, it talked about methane coming from animals and chlorofluorocarbons coming from, aerosols and stuff. But, and also the other big paradox is here, when the ice caps melt, ice reflect 90% of the infrared radiation, water absorbs 90%. As more solar caps and icebergs melt, there is more water which absorbs more temperature, and the earth gets water. So all that we do towards abating carbon and managing the greenhouse gases, there is the disruption that's kind of reached. So that's the reason why climate change has become a big, it's, you can't do anything much about it, but then you got to try and maintain it at the current levels. So that's why that's the urgency. That's the reason why we need to act now.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Shankar. And one interesting concept which you stated, that we wanted to keep the targets below 4 degrees. And that's the reasonable estimate. But COP26 said that we need to get it below 1.5. Do you think that's a reasonable estimate that we can achieve, given that there are so many complications and geopolitical relationships which actually dictate this particular scenario? In your opinion, do you think 1.5 is achievable?
So it is done with a little bit of science, and there is the science of climate change. You spoke about the target that's been taken, and this comes through from a global initiative that is linked to what's called the science-based targets, actually, where you drive ambitious plans, and we do need to have all the countries and businesses collaborating. But these decisions, and this 1.5, the tipping point, 4 is ambition. 4 is when you kind of are do business as usual, which you can't afford to. But this is based on a scientific emission reduction targets, which is based on what you can sometimes call the MAC curve, the marginal abatement cost curve. These are science-based targets taken across countries, across businesses, which is kind of cascaded up, which tell you how much and what the company needs to do to align with the global limits to ensure the warming is limited to 1.5. So yes, Arvind, Akshay, this all kind of net zero is done with factoring in all the emission factors, be it fossil fuels, the agriculture, the land usage, all of this is factored. The entire imbalance is considered there. The accumulation of GHGs is factored there. That's, like I mentioned, the main driver in the human-made climate change. So what happens is what's been done in the COP26, and even India has taken a target of going net carbon neutral by 2070, which is why slowly the public sectors are getting the push.
We haven't signed the treaty on coal usage yet.
Oh yeah, so that's one thing. That's a good other point. Why are we still continuing with coal? And as we speak, there's a crisis of coal also. So that's a challenge there. That's a paradox that we live in the current times. But each country, each business is being given targets to have a plan to go carbon neutral. Net carbon neutral means that you got to balance. On the left is the emissions. On the right is the CO2 removals, what we call the sink. What do we do to kind of abate the carbon? What's the kind of sink? You speak about the things we can do to reduce carbon emissions, the reduction of waste, energy, efficiency, all that, like we said, can be done. So to halt the global warming, we need to balance this. So there's the state of net zero emissions, which has been kind of done in a scientific manner. So net zero is a scientific target taken by all the nations together. This needs a lot of collaboration. As you know, even the last couple of seasons, even US was against it on the climate change agreements, they kind of backtracked. But I guess now the world is looking at things from a common perspective, and the Glasgow conference has been one game changer in the way we look at how we get to carbon neutral together.
Can you elaborate on net carbon zero emissions and the carbon offsets? Because many people believe that this entire concept is against the principle of achieving climate change, combating climate change, wherein companies will continue to increase their emissions, but rather go into the carbon markets and buy carbon credits or carbon offsets. Will that actually help in the long-term objective of 1.5?
So in a sense, like I said, I spoke about my journey as a greenhorn, where, like I said, one of the first projects I did was a wind turbine project, which was done in the biggest wind turbine farm in the world at that time, Maharashtra, in Dhule. This was done by a developer called BP, British Petroleum, which set up a 40 megawatt wind turbine farm in Maharashtra to gain carbon credits. So like I said, that's the context of the polluter pays. The developing countries had to take targets to reduce carbon, and there was a pressures on them. And while they couldn't do it at the cost that it was affordable, they tried to do it in countries where it was easier to do. And they struck partnerships, and you got the credits for that, carbon credits. So there is various projects called the CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project. There is the carbon credits that you can kind of get. There's a stock trading as such, and that's something that's going to be big in the way to come. But yes, that's the way to go forward. So it only works if all of us work together. Like until the Glasgow, India could still say that this isn't any of my doing. It's about the developing countries don't need to do that because it's all the pollution that's happened from 1750 and we weren't around there at that time. But this is the biggest journey here. And the biggest understanding, Akshay, is how you understand the role that we all play.
Yeah.
Yes, there is an industrial revolution that's happening. There is a lot of challenges that is industrialization is going to continue. And as you see, there's a lot of efforts being made to go green. Like I said, we reach the tipping point. So all that we do will be still less, but we still got to look at the green modes of transport. Even if you talk of EVs, electric vehicles, what powers the EV? If that is based on fossil fuel or non-renewable, it doesn't serve the purpose, right? So you need to ensure that it's fueled. It's, the supply, the electric supply is from a renewable source. So all the sources of fossil fuel, you spoke about coal, a lot of the countries, including India, has got a heavy dependence on coal. And it seems, paradoxical how we can get out of it. Even as we speak today, there is the pollution control boards still do not restrict companies from setting up coal-fired boilers. So the kind of generation we are in, that's something that's a shocker. But again, that's a transition that we are taking. It's a leap of faith that the countries are taking. And that's how we kind of look at things here today. It's also a journey, Akshay. It's also a journey.
So do you believe the transition technology to renewables is natural gas or nuclear? Do you have any opinion on that particular aspect?
So natural gas also, if you look at the definition of...
it is fossil fuels, but it is 50% lower than coal.
Yeah, it is. It is still, yeah. Yeah, still. So, I mean, you still prefer as a lesser of the two evils to have a CNG-fired kind of equipment or car. But if you look at the technical definition of renewables, it's something that does not deplete over time in our generation or the next. And for the millennials like you, it's something you got to think forward here. So yeah, there are, it's a transition. Like we're still speaking of coal and speaking of CNG. So obviously the next step there. But I think the transition has to go from fossil fuels. And I think in the country also we've seen from diesel-fired equipment, diesel-fired vehicles to petrol and now CNG and now the electrical revolution has come up a big way. It's a journey there. So I think natural gas is, I think, it's a stepwise progression. It's a continual improvement journey. So we can't, take a leap of faith overnight. We got to do it gradually. We've got to consolidate and then move forward.
And how is ESG different from CSR, Mr. Shankar? Because CSR was something that every company did, and it was mandated by Companies Act also to spend.
Okay. So ESG, a lot of people look at ESG as, ESG, like I spoke about, is got the triple bottom line here, the environmental, social, and governance. And some of the main parameters that go into this, and I speak about environmental, it speaks about water use, resource use, biodiversity, waste, energy emissions. Sustainability largely looks at that particular dimension. ESG has the triple bottom line overall. Sustainability kind of looks at that perspective. It looks at just that typical triple bottom line from the sustainability point of view. So while the bigger three factors in sustainability in ESG, uh, sustainability typically is considered the environmental of the operations. That's what is normally looked at. People normally, there is this term called CSR you mentioned. CSR in this journey is corporate social responsibility. So if you look at it, corporate social responsibility also began in some ways where, let's kind of talk of these. So sustainability largely, as I said, looks at the environmental aspects of operations, resource utilization, processing efficiency. It looks at energy, water, waste. ESG is slightly broader. It looks at the environmental, social, and governance. And ESG is slightly more metrics driven. Of course, sustainability also has its parameters that's defined by what they call the GRI and other platforms, benchmarks ESG issues. But ESG is more holistic. ESG is pretty overarching. If you call what kind of a role would you like to have as a millennial, I would say the next big role is ESG. Big dearth of ESG professionals. That's why ESG is most critical for every one of us. So just the question you asked about CSR. So largely, typically this was part of the environment, health and safety in the 80s. This began to be called sustainability in the 1990s and then kind of integrated into the CSR. So CSR is still the social arm of sustainability. It's corporate philanthropy. It's all about social wellness as you talk of. It talks of employee volunteerism and aligning with social issues. But ESG, obviously, as we understood now, is a bigger and more holistic concept.
Certainly. One important thing is, how does a company's sustainability goals and ESG goals align with the corporate goals of maximizing shareholder returns and profitability?
Okay. So for a company, for business to be in business, it has to stay in business. So it's also for an investor to make a good decision on a company, for an employee to decide which company to join. So does good ESG define good profitability? Are you aware of ITC?
Yeah, exactly.
So ITC began as the British American Tobacco Company through its subsidiaries, the Tobacco Manufacturers India, Rothmans International, and the Middleton Investment Company. In 1910s, it was called the Imperial Tobacco Company of India. The company was renamed the Indian Tobacco Company in 1970 and later branded the ITC. My cousin got married and my uncle said, I will have nothing to do with the son who was working with a company that manufactures cigarettes. And this continued for 10 years until it actually changed his company. The talk of the impact, the social impact of a company there, talk of the reputation on, as a kind of a matrimonial kind of no-go, talk of the branding of ITC then and talk of the ITC now. It still gets its large revenue from cigarettes, but today ITC has rebuilt its reputation. It's totally different. Its earlier chairman used to talk about the triple bottom line in its AGM. Its annual report used to be the integrated one report. It's not a financial report and then another report. It's one report together. They're the first company, this is a slightly dated one, but it's water positive, carbon positive. So the last decade and a half plus. So this is the way that the company has used sustainability and to brand it in a different way. Today, a company that has been known for the wrong reasons earlier is now one of the blue chip companies. I think so many companies in the world, you can give more examples. The more sustainable a company is, the more it is likely to gain space, main headspace there. So that's one good example. Many examples, Akshay, but I guess ITC as one company that embraced the triple bottom line is one good example. And the example of my personal experience with, a cousin who was totally debarred from the family for joining ITC. He wasn't a smoker or anything like that, but that tells you how bad it can be.
So working for a company which manufactures cigarettes is worse than smoking a cigarette.
Oh, yeah.
Coming to the global regulatory framework, as you're aware that there are many countries with their own standards, one GRI or the SASB, integrated ESG reporting. India too has implemented that. SEBI has implemented this BRSR reporting for the top 100,000 listed companies by market cap from 20 to 23. So can you please shed some light on the BRSR reporting and how that is going to change the framework in our country?
So let's just talk of the global landscape and then look at the local landscape, shall we say, because India is the first country that's mandated ESG reporting, okay? No country in the world, nobody else, no framework really kind of definitively states that it's mandated from the next year for the top 1,000 listed companies as SEBI has. So there's a lot of framework, like we say. We have the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, you have the integrated reporting. I spoke about ITC and many companies like TCS, Infosys that do integrated reporting. The TCFD, another kind of entity. There is the CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project is called earlier. All of these are reporting frameworks, right? There's a lot of change that's happening in the GRI also. And while the GRI is the most popular reporting framework, the templates used are the ones that's globally adopted. What's come now is from SEBI, the BRSR. So the BRSR is this new animal, and a lot of people are wondering what this is all about. So BRSR has a nice, it's kind of integrated the best of class and has taken all of these together. So, in a very nice single shot, the SEBI has looked at, and GRI, like I said, is the best topic for best platform for reporting globally. The CDP largely looks at climate, water, and forest impacts. The SASB looks at the impact on the financials, largely looks at the financial impacts on companies. The TCFD largely looks at climate risk with the framework towards how climate risks, and that's the biggest challenge from climate change. So the SEBI has benchmarked some of those best practices. It's got global teams looking at that. And this is what is the best amalgamation of framework there. So, and just to kind of quickly look at this, CDP, like I said, looks at how this is, looks at mainstreaming these. The brings big value. SASB looks at the capitals, the human capital, social capital, the leadership, governance, environment. And of course, the TCFD looks at governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and failures. And he spoke about various other things like the science-based targets. All of these have been benchmarked together, and the SEBI has put it all together and got an integrated approach to implement, where the steps thereof would be something that benchmarks the best in class. It's still something that people are trying to figure out, Akshay, but I think the touching point here is that the BRSR, the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting, is the first time ever in the world that a best-in-class benchmark on ESG reporting has been mandated. It's not just for the top 1,000 companies, Akshay. It's also going to the MSMEs. There's a BRSR light that's coming in for the non-1,000 companies. It's kind of going to spread the net. And therefore, this, when made mandatory and the SEBI coming in, and for the listed and the non-listed companies, this is going to be the single comprehensive source of non-financial sustainability information relevant to all the business stakeholders. And the point here on stakeholders, who is the stakeholder? That's the important point of how you look at sustainability reporting. You need to understand who's the stakeholder, who's the investor, who are the shareholders, which of the regulators are important, who are the public at large, who are the relevant ones. Largely, when you look at everything else, you do reporting looking inside out. You look at what is relevant for you, what is material to you. ESG kind of puts it in a complete perspective where you both look inside out, but also outside in. What does the stakeholder expect? I spoke about materiality. This also gives you a complete balanced information that also needs to be reported. And therefore, the BRSR is going to be a big game changer for industries and will lead an industrial revolution in reporting in India.
Lovely. And I think this information gathering could lead into carbon taxes in India.
Yes, I think the journey forward, Akshay, is there's a lot of the fast forward and trying to put in the viewing glass. I'm sure Rosefield will do this better for the perspective, but we can see that this is what's going to come now. And I think the CFO is slowly going to read the chair to the CEO, but it's going to be a lot of convergence there. It's still evolving, of course. It's still early days, but the formation of ESG taking it to the board, financing of projects, and I think this is still a teaser session. I'm sure we'll get into a deeper dive in the next few sessions and we'll do a little bit of training on these. But from the credit point of view, where does ESG come from? From the investor, from the investor, from the analyst, from the stakeholder, from the regulators. It's from all dimensions. So everyone gets a piece of cake and everyone has something to talk about. Everybody has a need, and all that need from all the interested parties is what BRSR, the sustainability frameworks, will address.
Certainly. And I think one important thing which we constantly hear is the dearth of sustainability professionals and a governing body to train the next generation into the importance of sustainability reviews and sustainability implementation. And that's something which offers opportunity from job creation perspective, as well as in terms of generating talent in the country, which can certainly help companies in achieving the goals. So
absolutely.
With that, I believe we can go for audience questions. Thank you, Mr. Shankar. It was a very informative, engaging session. Especially, I love the example which you had given about your brother-in-law. and I'm sure the audience also enjoyed today's discussion. I would request the audiences to put their questions in the Q&A box, and Kasturi would take those questions up and pose it to our expert, Mr. Shankar.
Thanks, Akshay. Participants, you can put your questions in the, you can type your questions in the Q&A section.
My fun, before the questions could come into the Q&A box, I have one question. The technology to power electric vehicles, because the audience of Rosefield are more interested in electric vehicles.
True.
So the first question is whether lithium ion versus hydrogen cell. So do you believe which technology is the way forward? In your opinion, which technology should be adopted by India and other developing countries in powering the electric vehicles?
So the answer to all the questions, Akshay, is where the CEO's hat, be it lithium or be it hydrogen. Look at this triple bottom line. Ask the questions: is the decision viable? Is it equitable? Is it bearable? So lithium has its pluses and minuses. There is the impacts of this, including pollution, etc. Hydrogen, renewable. So the kind of chemicals that go into it, the life cycle impact of lithium. So there is, I will not give a definite answer to this. It's a loaded question, but I'll just say that for any question you have in life, try and wear the hat as a CEO and ask this question from the CFO's hat. Is there a return on investment? Is it financially viable? Is it socially equitable? And is it environmentally or is it environmentally? So if you look at this and you look at lithium, look at the life cycle of disposal, look at hydrogen, look at how green it is, I think you'll get your answer right there. So for all questions that you're looking at, if you're able to use this approach to decision making, use this as the triple filter test to get the answer to all your questions. And there could be more ramifications to this. Somebody asks me, suppose I look at the lighting out here. What's the ideal lighting you would like in an office? Move from the tube lights to look at a different kind of frame here. We just had a session on ventilation and office space, and they said your green kind of lighting is causing me a headache. It's affecting my productivity. So each of these elements has got two dimensions. So we got to look at the triple dimension and try and make every decision based on this.
So the triple bottom line is the ultimate mantra going forward.
Perfect.
So there's a question from Mr. Tapan Shah. Any government incentives are available for meeting or exceeding the ESG targets? Is Mr. Tapan Shah's question.
Yeah, there is a lot of. So one is the government provided incentives. I know that I was in industry where putting up a solar farm, and talking of photovoltaic today, wasn't so viable. The return on investment took a lot of time, and we wanted government subsidies. There's government subsidies on some fuels, on solar. So there is an increasing kind of subsidy that's coming in for green technologies, and the investment in these are also something that over time will pay back. So there is a combination of good, subsidies that come through. Let's answer this way, Tapan. Sometimes people say that green comes at a cost. When you try and convince a supplier to go green, to look at a green technology, you'll always say that it costs too much. Marginally, you could say a ballpark 10% increase in cost. But if you look at the kind of return on investment from all the three dimensions, and even kind of put it on the financial, you'll find that the payback is pretty good. So yes, there is a lot of subsidies coming in from the government. Closer home, since we've taken a target of net neutrality by 2070, the government is kind of talking to the public sectors, talking to private companies, and there'll be some kind of push. Why there's a mandate? We believe in the mandates here, but there will be kind of increasing focus, and therefore there will be opportunities for companies to privilege using technology that go green. Also, a lot of my colleagues and friends are investing in green technologies. You can look where the Ambanis and Adanis are going, regardless of anything else about them. The future is green. So where they put the money, that's where the mouth is. So the future is green. Hope that helps, Tapan.
Thank you, Mr. Shankar. The next question is from Gaurav Vinde. Can companies which perform better in terms of ESG also perform better financially? So
this is a typical no-brainer. Yes, a company that performs on the ESG dimensions will also get profitability or rather prosperity in a better shape, right? So look at anything that goes wrong from the social or the environmental front and the impact on, we just spoke about some elements, talk of the impact on brand reputation. If I'm looking at I talked to a couple of companies, one fatality, I think one of the guys were telling me, the cost of one fatality is in crores. How is that? You're looking at the share price. I'm talking of a big mega giant who said, we will not do business with you because you have a poor safety track record. So the impact and implication is in crores, loss of business, loss of reputation. So good ESG, Gaurav, meets good business. Its profitability is underwritten. Yes. So yes, if you do good ESG, you will surely make profits. You will sustain over time, I'm sure. And like I spoke about the example of a supply chain company, you might need initial investment, but once you do that, in a couple of years, you will definitely make good profits.
Thank you, Mr. Shankar. Next question is from another Mr. Shankar Iyer. Would BRSR disclosure and ESG related norms be applicable only to listed corporates or even extended to private limited companies? And second, whether it will be punitive in nature to enforce compliance. Third, beyond monetary and include a more environmentally friendly demonstrated practices by corporates. So quite many questions. So let's take it one at a time. Would BRSR and ESG related norms be applicable only to listed corporates or even extended to private limited companies?
So let's get this clear. So the SEBI, for the Securities and Exchange Board of India, has this March come up with the mandate. It's largely to ensure building of resilient and sustainable businesses along the ESG, which has made the BRSR mandatory. And again, the BRSR, like I mentioned, has a connect and interoperability between the global frameworks we spoke about, CDP, the TCFD, that the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the SASB that Akshay spoke about, the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, the GRI, and the UN Global Compact, and also the World Business Council for Sustainable Reporting. So this is currently mandatory from financial year. This is voluntary this year, and though a lot of companies have reported already this year, but it's mandated for the top 1,000 listed entities from 2022-23. But like I said, the net is spreading, Shankar, it's increasing, and there's a BRSR light that is being expected of other companies, where there is the BRSR light is all the indicators that's there in the BRSR currently, except the leadership indicators, the talks of intent. So the only that's kind of not mandated. So yes, the net is spreading. A lot of the non-listed companies, MSMEs, private companies, all of them will be slowly under the purview of the SEBI's BRSR. So that's why I said the BRSR is a game changer, which is going to revolutionize the way ESG disclosure and how transparency hits business responsibility and sustainability reporting. So earlier it was reported, the last 8 years reported through the business responsibility report. Yeah. Now there's a lot of emphasis on disclosures and transparency, which will really kind of help companies assess sustainability related risks and opportunities. So it's kind of going to look at not just risks, but as opportunities also. So it's going to be everyone kind of getting into the sustainability bandwagon over time.
And the next follow-up question from him is whether it will be punitive in nature to ensure its compliance.
So you know the SEBI well, guys. SEBI, I think the SEBI has a strong arm. As we speak, Akshay had the privilege of doing the first webinar with SEBI after they unleashed the BRSR, and asked them this exact question: how strong? How strong? What's the teeth the SEBI has? I guess the SEBI has a lot of teeth. Every company secretary knows that SEBI has a lot of teeth. So over time, I guess it's early days to speak about it, but this has become a compliance requirement. It's got with the minimal expectations. So I'm sure the SEBI has got enough teeth to kind of make this top 1,000 plus more get into compliance extra fast.
Last from him, whether it will move beyond the monetary and include a more environmentally friendly demonstrative practices like planting trees, measuring reduction in emissions, etc. by corporates.
Yes, each of these. So Shankar, it's definitely going beyond monetary. It's like I said, it's more than the financial. It's a non-financial that's under focus. So not just the planting trees. If you plant trees, you kind of have a carbon sink. You reduce emissions. You have a carbon footprint that is reduced. You reduce waste. You kind of got to measure it. You'll be reporting it, and reporting it in the public platform year on year. So we'll be necessarily looking at the last 2-year data. So people will look at how you progress over time on each of the parameters, each of them very comprehensive frameworks, each of them capturing the best in class practices. So definitely going beyond monetary, looking at the environmental, social also. So look at it, it's talking of the 9 principles of the BRR, which is as good as it gets. So it's going to be looking definitely beyond the financial.
Thank you, Mr. Shankar. The next question again from Mr. Gaurav Dinde. Should one offer positive or negative screening while thinking of a sustainable investment strategy?
So I'm not sure what a positive or negative screening means in a screening, but
maybe
if you look
sustainable investment strategy, if you could elaborate on that.
So I look at it this way. I've been part of various engineering, procurement, construction companies where when they look at investing in a company, they would like to look at the projection of a company. Like I said, what's the net carbon neutrality? What's the carbon goals? What's the emissions targets? What's the water reduction goals? So when I screen the company as an investor, ESG becomes a pre-qualifier. A lot of reasons why companies get into ESG is because of funding. And for a funding agency, the first question would be, how green are you? And also looking at data, quantifiable metrics, and not just ESG reporting, but also assurance. Assurance is having a third party to validate all your disclosures. So yes, I'm not sure if it is positive or negative, but every investor would look at screening as a pre-qualification. ESG is mandatory for allocating any funds, because for their funds to be stable in good hands, it's going to be looking at how this maintains over time.
Thank you, Mr. Shankar. Do you think also banks will follow suit in
Oh, yes, definitely. Banks will, funding banks, it's going to be a big journey there. If you look at the market space, it's largely about how this goes. So the next steps, definitely, the ESG agenda is something that has begun with reporting, but this is going beyond. As systems mature, the funding, the banking agencies, all of them will kind of look at this in a bigger way. The best of my ESG colleagues used to be environment safety professionals, but now they're all chartered accountants, CFOs. So you can see that the journey has kind of taken on the system maturity from the levels of awareness to now maturity is hitting the banking fraternity. Yes, so it is kind of growing.
Thank you, Mr. Shankar. Now, the next question is whether companies hide their carbon footprint by outsourcing their production processes to other countries. Does ESG take this into consideration? If yes, how?
Okay, so this is like I mentioned the example of my first journey to green. So the company in the US, Alternative Energy, which invested in a green project in India to abate their carbon footprint there. I'll give another simple example. Suppose I source the power for my unit from the grid. The grid could be fueled by fossil fuel. It could come from a hydro project. It could come by a renewable project, solar project, right? If I take it from a green source, I do an open access. So I'm kind of abating my carbon footprint on what we call scope 2, the indirect bought out electricity. So yes, if developing country outsources its carbon emissions by doing some green projects in a third world country or developing country, it's still okay, right? Overall, across the entire value chain, you're looking at the emissions from the entire life cycle. The overall life cycle in the universe we define will get reduced. So across the value chain, the carbon footprint gets lowered. So therefore, it's not about disguising. Of course, the other thing you could do, I spoke about when in the pandemic, I was in a company, I was talking of Sterling and Wilson Solar, where we got listed and we did an IPO in 2019. And later on, there was a lot of pull from the investors to go green. We did a carbon footprinting. We looked at a carbon footprint, and then we realized that we could easily reduce the carbon footprint by buying certified emission reduction certificates. You can actually buy carbon footprint certificates. I myself can buy CERs from our own family and go green, go carbon neutral. So this company did that. So in a sense, either by investing in a green technology, doing a green project in your extended value chain, or taking a green step like buying CERs, all these are ways towards reducing the carbon footprint. So all these works, all of it as per the carbon footprint calculation does work well. So there's no harm in outsourcing your requirements here. Of course, in a sense, between the calculation between what you do and what your supply chain does, you've got to ensure there's no double accounting. But apart from that, this is absolutely fair.
Thank you, Mr. Shankar. I think we can talk about this topic the whole day and still that wouldn't be enough. I'm sure we'll have such rounds of discussion again. To lastly, to ask you your perspective, now we spoke a lot about companies. What do you think individuals, especially the participants like today, need to do in terms of ESG to conclude the session?
So the last gig I did, I don't know if you're aware, some of you follow the IPL. Mumbai Indians hasn't done too well, Akshay. But there is one team that's never won the IPL, that's RCB, that does one green cricket tournament every year. And that not only is the branded green, that's in every way kind of looking at lowering the carbon footprint. So green has become the game-changing session, and it's not just about being green from the greenwashing kind of perspective, but living a green lifestyle is about how you can take a mode of transport that works well. How after this session, not only would you hibernate your system, your laptop, your thing, you also shut it down. Your monitor, you don't put it on hibernate. Your TV screen, you kind of put it off, switch off the mains, switch off something. Recycle, reuse, avoid plastics, use metals, kind of don't get into plastics, walk to work, cycle, take up a green lifestyle, eat green, buy vegetables from a local produce, go local, kind of travel, thinking of what's the best mode of transport. See if you can do a Zoom call, see if you can do a session without physically traveling. Those are the simple ways by which each of us can contribute to global warming by reducing our emissions. Because if you're looking at the net carbon neutral goals for India by 2070, and also the carbon reduction target, the net neutral 1.5 degrees, the tipping point, if you want to kind of hold into that, each of us need to contribute. So each of us need to live a green lifestyle. Each of us need to play a green game in life. And I guess that's how all of us can contribute there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shankar. I would invite Kasturi for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Akshay. Indeed, this was a very insightful session on ESG. I think this is just a start of the conversation. We are getting to know about ESG, and there are so many more topics. So we'll be running an ESG series there. So there will be a few more webinars. So do watch out for. We are planning our next session next webinar on ESG in July, where we'll be discussing challenges in ESG as well as talking about ESG investing. So participants, do watch out our space. So do follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, you'd be getting our mailers. So do watch out. Do let us know your opinion. I think we have put a feedback form link in the chat box. So do let us know your views on ESG. What are the topics in ESG that you would be interested in? And I'm sure we'll be getting experts like Shankar to answer all your questions, right? And Shankar, in fact, we'd be more than happy to have another round, another session, many more sessions on ESG with you on particular topics suggested by the participants. Thank you so much, Shankar, and thank you, Akshay. Thank you to HPCL for being a strong support to Rosefield. Thank you to all my team members at Rosefield. And last but not the least, thank you to all the participants for joining in. For participants who are not able to join, we'll be sharing a recorded link shortly so that you can again view the session in detail. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining in today. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Kasturi. Thanks, Mr. Shankar.
Thank you, Akshay. Stay safe, stay well, stay sustainable.